Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the social democratic left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. We are only 2 weeks into a second Trump administration, and it appears all of our worst fears are coming to pass. Sworn into office, surrounded by the oligarchs who own our major means of communication, the insurrection-fomenting felon has issued executive orders at a furious rate, pardoning the seditious goons who attacked the U.S. Capitol on his behalf, attempting to revoke constitutionally enshrined birthright citizenship, shredding decades-old federal anti-discrimination policy, redefining sex and gender along religious fundamentalist lines, and starting a trade war with our closest neighbors and allies. Meanwhile, Trump's Gestapo chief, Tom Homan, raids vulnerable immigrant communities, and the richest man in the world, apartheid South African illegal alien Elon Musk, the diseased brain and bloated wallet behind the whole operation, employs a vanguard of incel flunkies to dismantle the federal government and the progress of the last century. National Democrats have been flat-footed and inept at best, complicit at worst. Though they apparently don't know how to use it, at least federally elected Democrats still have a fair amount of institutional power they could exercise. Here in Indiana, Republican supermajorities in both houses of the General Assembly leave Hoosier Democrats few levers to pull as the GOP extremists look to gut public education, further erode voting rights, and demonize our LGBTQ friends and neighbors, just a fraction of the fuckery oozing from under the State House dome this session. Defeated and demoralized, Democrats seem lost. We, do not seem to know who we are or what we stand for. I've talked about this before here in this space, and it comes up repeatedly as I speak with other activists and organizers. Lots of people on the populist left, the Bernie Sanders AOC wing of the party, argue that Democrats need to center a working-class economic message. Some centrist corporate Dems blame the party for going too woke, especially in supporting transgender rights. In both cases, identity politics takes the brunt of the criticism. And listen, I largely agree that the Democratic Party has centered identitarian rather than economic concerns for many years now, to their detriment. But there are different paths available to rectify this situation. Some would abandon support for marginalized groups entirely to focus on kitchen table issues. Others would suggest populist economics be placed at the center of said table with a side of identity politics. Others still might say, the economy's just fine, thank you very much, and double down on the politics of race, sex, and gender. As I've listened to and participated in these debates, sometimes in rooms full of nothing but cisgender white men, I can't help but wonder how folks in some of these marginalized groups feel about their very existence being tossed around like a political football. My guest today is a return visitor to Who's Left, Veronica Pejril is a music professor at DePauw University in Greencastle. She served on that city's council from 2020 to 2024, making her the first openly transgender elected official in Indiana. Last year, she ran for State Senate District 24, losing to former Hendricks County Sheriff Brett Clark. This January, she was chosen as president of the Indiana Stonewall Democrats, the official LGBTQ constituency caucus in the party, with a seat on the state central committee. In this conversation, which we recorded on January 23rd, we talk about maintaining one's sanity amidst the onslaught, keeping a focus on state and local politics, and spotlighting things that might otherwise go unnoticed. We'll do our little autopsy of November's loss before getting into identity politics, what that means to her, and the identities that really matter. Now, before we turn to the interview, I want to thank all of you for your support for this project, especially those of you who have made the leap with a paid subscription. Your contributions have helped me make meaningful connections with fascinating people from across Indiana and beyond. We are building a network of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the wealthy and connected few. I have so much more to give you, this community, and Indiana's future. But the reality is I need financial support to do this work. All I'm asking is $5 a month or $50 a year to help me write more, research more, organize more, and keep improving Who's Left. Improvements like our own domain, where it is now much easier to find us. Visit whosleft.us. That's HOOSLEFT.us for all of your articles, episodes, archives, and please consider a paid subscription while you're there. We're also on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left. And I'm still on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter at ScottRodge78 and ScottRodge78 at Hoosier.social on Mastodon. Share on whatever social media platforms you use and invite others. Leave reviews and feedback. Let us build a radically democratic Indiana together. Thanks again. Now here is my interview with Veronica Pejril. Veronica Pejril, welcome back to the Who's Left podcast.
Hi, Scott. It's great to be back. I really appreciate the opportunity to check in with you once again.
Yeah, and I appreciate having you here. Scary times, and it's important to hold people close right now.
Indeed. This is, we're only, a little more than 72 hours into a new administration, and we've already had confirmed assaults on refugees and immigrant communities. We've had executive orders that have clamped down on folks' freedom of ability to present as themselves with documentation that matches their affirmed gender, and so much that's been coming down the pipeline, and goodness knows what's next.
Yeah, well, okay, so let's start there now. For folks who don't know Veronica already, you are the first openly trans elected official in the state of Indiana. Is that correct?
That's correct, and hopefully not the last. But we've got work to do on that.
So, in these times, I'm especially thinking about folks like you, um, folks in some of those other marginalized groups you talked about, immigrants, etc. Um, just how are you doing? How are you feeling? With in this first 72 hours of the new normal.
Um, I have to give myself little bits of reality check every once in a while. This is it is taking a toll on my mental health and my well-being, not just because of what I see coming down for myself and folks like me, but from what I've been hearing from others in our LGBTQ community, and particularly our trans and non-binary, gender non-conforming folks, and particularly young folks who may not have had um, opportunity to get to a safe place in their life, as it were, in a place of autonomy, or perhaps a place of being able to have an escape hatch in case they need to either relocate or um, get away from what's going on. This is challenging times. I work at a university. I also so I see how our students feel, our queer students, and how they're doing. I also am president of my alma mater's LGBTQ Alumni Association, and our students at that other campus are also feeling it, even though that might be a blue state over there. This is, especially international students are having a hard time. Schools, colleges have been, with us being halfway through January, a number of colleges uh, requested that their international students either stay in the United States over the winter break, or come back early before the change of administration, in the event that there might be changes to their ability to enter through the usual ports of call with their passports. I've also, within the last 72 hours, become aware of actually two instances of folks who were living perfectly happy non-binary lives with passports that reflected that gender marker, who are traveling internationally within the next week or two. And those folks are concerned that they are going to either be harassed or unable to re-enter the United States when they get to their port of entry. I don't have quick and easy answers for anybody right now, and I'm mad as hell.
Understandably. And I'm also mad as hell on your behalf, and it's just disgusting to see. And I thought we were moving in the right direction and making progress, and this administration, the amount of support they have from a lot of American people, it's disheartening.
It is the reality of a populist authoritarian government that we've got right now. They have been canoodled and deceived into believing that the person they voted for is going to lower the price of their eggs and return the nation to a coal mining economy. It's where we returned. Yeah, it's just not the reality of the global economy that we live in. Even if we were completely economically isolationist, which would be catastrophic to our nation, it would still, the fact of the matter is that our nation is reliant on new technologies that have made us more efficient. And that includes the ways that we get around in transportation, the ways that we create the energy that we use to light our lights and heat our homes, and you know, the egg prices are not going to be going down for so long as the bird flu continues to be influencing the egg market.
Uh, yeah, and well, with the folks that they want to put in charge of things like, overseeing the USDA or overseeing Health and Human Services or the CDC, you got to figure pandemic preparedness is just gonna suffer tremendously.
And for as much as I would love to be standing on a soapbox and screaming outrage right from 72 hours in, and there are plenty of reasons to be doing so, I need to reserve my energy to get through my daily life, but also be prepared for what's next. And as you mentioned, there are some especially incompetent people who have been nominated for cabinet level positions at the federal level. But, here at the state level, there are things going on right now with our General Assembly that are reflective of a particularly poorly informed legislative body, either when it comes down to how to regulate free speech on our college campuses, or civil liberties for students on our college campuses. Our folks in the supermajority don't have particularly good experience either working for, or sometimes even graduating from our great colleges and universities here in Indiana. That's a little bit
Right,
of inside rub.
Sure, hey, you know what? Not to be elitist, I'm sure there's a space for folks who didn't to
absolutely. Don't get me
participate
wrong.
in the legislative process.
Don't get me wrong there.
But these folks are
consult with experts when you don't consult, or do consult with experts when you don't have expertise. Don't rely on what you might have read on TikTok or seen on TikTok or read on Twitter, which I will continue.
Yeah. So many. Oh.
Along with the Sears Tower.
Well, yes. As somebody who grew up in Northwest Indiana, I am a Sears Tower purist. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, not at all. Well, we're talking about the state legislature here, and so many of these folks are willfully ignorant. They don't need expertise. They already know because they've gained their expertise from their particular reading of the Bible.
Perhaps, and when we look at the latest salvo of legislation that's being directed at our LGBTQ plus community here in Indiana, some of it is just a rehashing of bills that have been sort of perennially disregarded in committees in the past, but there's just part of me that this year thinks it might be different. And our queer community here in Indiana, especially those who haven't been particularly well plugged into the flow of hateful bills on that perennial basis. For example, those coming from that lady down in the southern portion of the Indy Metro, Michelle. Is that Michelle Davis?
Oh yeah, Michelle Davis is the special. Yes,
Yeah.
it's fabulous.
So she has, last year she was the sole author to a bill that sought to write effectively folks like me out of Indiana's code. The reality of gender identity as science accepts it. And this year, that same bill, a relatively mirror image of it is being uplifted in the Senate. But they're bringing a few other things along for the ride, including retroactive um, um, uh, cancellations of prior changes and amendments that trans folks might have made to their birth certificates here in the state of Indiana, or retroactive cancellations of other state issued documents like driver's licenses and such, because goodness knows having documentation that is consistent with one's presentation apparently is not something that we can all count on in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, and you're, I believe, referring to Senate Bill 441,
441,
which
yeah.
defines sex and gender for the purposes of for Indiana state law. So they can make these words mean whatever they want to at the legislative level, whether that actually matches, I don't know, what legitimate sex and gender experts would define them as, right?
Well, let me just be bold here and point out that I don't think any of the senators in the supermajority are either gender or sex experts. But that said, the historically speaking, these people didn't always used to be like this. It's been 20 years since I changed my name and my legal documentation here in the state of Indiana. And when I did so under the blessing of the administration of the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles at the time, run by none other than Secretary of State Todd Rokita, when he was Secretary of State of our great state. But apparently he's had a change of heart over the last 2 decades because of the growing obsession amongst that supermajority that somehow folks like me are a grand threat to their liberties, so they must therefore restrict mine. Fact of the matter is that giving me the liberties that I deserve as an American and as a Hoosier in no way takes away from any other Hoosiers' freedoms and liberties. It is not possible.
Well, woke made them do.
Oh yes. Caffeine makes me do.
Yes. And these, that's not the only one. There are about a dozen bills in the Indiana legislature, working their way through it. Let's hope they won't all pass. Let's hope none of them pass. But
let's hope that some of these things just don't even get heard in committee. And prior practice has shown that sometimes happens. But again, given the tone from on high in Washington this year, I think that there is less reservation perhaps amongst the leadership in either house of the General Assembly, and I hope to be proven wrong.
Trump being in Washington and doing Trump stuff sort of gives them permission to be their worst. Number one, because they're, following the leader, but also because so much of the attention is going to be focused on Trump and the national news and everything they're up to, that at the state level, they're going to be able to fly under the radar more so even than they already knew.
Well, and that's part of the grand plan. If not that I'm suggesting that there is that well organized a conspiracy, but the chaos in Washington does provide a great deal of cover for the violence against marginalized communities that is happening at the state level here in Indiana, and to that point, over the last couple of decades of the demise of local and local media and even regional media in so many of our markets, folks who used to be engaged in the civic process and being plugged into what's happening in their city councils and in their county councils, and knowing what kinds of issues are relevant to their communities at the local level, instead are directing all of their energies that ought to be directed locally at the loud national voice of talking heads on their cable news or on their social media memes or in those in those TikTok shorts that are quite honestly influencing folks on both sides of the aisle. And we all need at every place along the political spectrum to come back to local, where local matters, because it's never been more important than it is today to get engaged in the process of what's happening locally, politically, in your community. Know what's going on. It might not be sexy, it might not be glamorous, but it is essential, because your local leaders set a tone and a path, and goodness knows, especially for underrepresented or areas where Democrats are woefully underrepresented, there just aren't enough good examples of leadership and cooperative policy making, that's being demonstrated at the local level. And we need to bring that back. And so people need to take take this time to step away from the loud voices of the national game, which are certainly important, but we can't make it all of our diet, and we need to get plugged back into our local communities. And it's a sad state of affairs when the information that so many folks have about what's happening at their local level, whether it's who's fixing the streets or plowing the snow or repairing the sidewalk, that those folks are learning that from rumor mills called chatter forums out in rural Indiana on Facebook and places like that. It's just a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, and that, at the state and local level is where the decisions that actually affect our day-to-day lives are made. So much of the stuff in Washington is just noise and bluster and a distraction, and yes, they can set the tone, but any of those laws coming out of there are gonna have to go through the courts and everything else, and it drags and it takes time, and it sucks up all your attention. Meanwhile,
federal executive orders are press releases wrapped in the guise of legislation, and so many of them are going to see court fights before they have the opportunity to find full enforcement. Uh, on the other hand, and when we look at the legislative bodies in Washington, frankly, there's such gridlock that whatever might get through um, this administration isn't going to move any more quickly than things did under the last 4 years under President Biden. So it's where things really move quickly are in a well-oiled supermajority machine that like the Indiana General Assembly, where the Senate and the House of Representatives can get things done without any Democrats in the room. They can caucus, come up with their policy decisions and how things are going to run, and then the Democrats in the room are just mere spectators to the drama that plays out.
Yeah, and they can kick and stomp their feet and make powerful speeches and try to filibuster, but in the end, they don't have any actual power because of the supermajority.
But I wish I could be here 72 hours after this change of federal administration and say I'm full of joy, or I can or at least that I have any joy to share. That's a challenging thing to share. Sometimes we need to dig deep and think about what is it that can bring joy in a moment like this, and sometimes the only joy that we have at our disposal is hope, and knowing that while they might take away the legal, my legal existence, they're not going to erase the legitimacy of my existence, because no governmental body can do that. And that's a something that I hold close to my heart right now in moments like this. But it's for young folks, as Bishop Buddy pointed out 48 hours ago, that young LGBTQ folks are scared right now, because they don't know, particularly in a world that they've not had an opportunity to build a stable career and find adequate housing for themselves. Are they growing up in a world that is going to deny them employment, deny them adequate housing, going to deny them basic civil rights, in this extraordinarily divisive political climate that where you've got the party in power in Washington right now, beating the drums of liberty while denying the liberty of so many.
Yeah, the irony is incredibly thick.
It truly is.
Now, we know what Republicans are all about. We expect this from them. They've got more extreme, but they've been trending this direction. Now, what I worry about is, with what power they do have at the local level and, nationally as well, are Democrats going to stand up for the community? Because in the wake of the election loss, I heard a lot of maybe throwing the LGBTQ community, particularly the T's, under the bus. Like somehow this is all your fault that Democrats lost in November, and not all of the thousands of other things it could be.
It's a milieu of things, and I'm not a political expert enough to be able to speculate 2 months after the electoral loss as to what exactly played all the roles. But I think that it was multi-dimensional thing, particularly, we had a sitting president who held on to the notion of running running for reelection, perhaps far too long to give an adequate opportunity to a new candidate to tell her story. For those of us who were plugged into her story, we heard it well. For those of us who were plugged in elsewhere, we did not. And in this divisive and in this divisive climate, the door to door wasn't swaying hearts and minds. The phone calls weren't swaying hearts and minds. People had made up their minds largely long before September and October of 2024. So I'm not here to do post-mortem hot wash or anything like that, but it is that we have to move on. We have to recognize that we're at a deficit of representation, but that we have a compelling message to share that, one, hasn't been heard enough, and two, perhaps hasn't been believed enough. And those are two separate things. And we're not doing a great job in terms of convincing people that we can do great things when we work together as community, as one community, as a state of Indiana, or as a United States of America, or as a city coming together to agree upon how it's going to invest in its public schools and in its and in its sidewalks and its accessible infrastructure. All of those things, when we work together, when we are of one mind to better our communities and not put down the stranger and not put down the other and not push out people who don't look, love, or worship like we do, we all are better for it. And that's a message that unfortunately hasn't been told loudly enough in the spaces that need to be heard.
Yeah. And yeah, there were certain Democrats, in the wake of the election losses, maybe lashing out, and I feel like they bought into some of the misinformation and the bad myths being directed at folks like you, and I'm worried that mindset might take hold in the party, and they would consider abandoning standing up for everybody's human rights for political expediency.
Well, one thing I will tell you, Scott, is that symbolism sometimes means things, and representation sometimes is important in terms of what it tells our party, what it tells who we are, or tells others who we are as a party. And I have been blessed in the last several weeks to have earned the trust of our Indiana Stonewall Democrats caucus, to earn the role as president of that organization, of that caucus. And I am humbled to go forward with a voice to the state central committee, with my voice, right? I will, of course, speak knowing that I speak for the caucus, but, representation matters. I'm not the first trans person to sit on a Democratic state central committee, but I am in the state of Indiana. And the representation right now matters a lot. I think. Um, I'm not gonna talk about it that much more beyond this, but being at the table and being able to bring my voice at this time, when we see these kinds of hateful legislative and executive actions coming from both the Indiana General Assembly and from the federal government that are directed squarely at our trans and non-binary siblings. That is, it's important to be a vocal and visible voice in the party and in the community. And I am, again, humbled to be able to bring my voice and my face to that role. Don't make me start crying.
And I suspect you are going to be fantastic in that role, and do a great service for the Indiana Stonewall Democrats and just for the party in general. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, you talked about the importance of symbolism and representation and how those things matter, and they do. Yet, as I'm in a lot of spaces where we are talking about where the party went wrong and why they lost in November, one of the things I hear from folks who I generally agree with on a lot of things is they say that Democrats have gone too in on identity politics. So first of all, like, what does that phrase identity politics mean to you, like, when you hear it? And I guess analyze that.
I look at so the phrase identity politics may be a new one, but I don't think it describes a new phenomenon. I don't think it describes a new need and a new struggle for our people. And when I say our people, I mean our people as Americans, our people as Hoosiers, because frankly, the civil rights movement of the 1960s could have been characterized at the time as identity politics. The wars are often started and ended around identity politics. The struggle in the Middle East is a matter of identity politics for so many, right? So I am disappointed that folks are using the phrase in a new form, whether it's the word woke or the word identity politics or the word culture war, to describe something that is far more sinister, which is just straight up bigotry against people who aren't like you and people who you refuse to come to understand and to love as your neighbor.
I think, and I'm trying to, like, thread this needle as I'm in these spaces and talking to people, because I generally agree with, we need to be talking about economics and wealth inequality and income distribution and oligarchy, but we don't have to abandon marginalized communities to do that. Like,
No.
these things are not mutually exclusive, and we shouldn't think of them as such.
Multiple things can be true at once, and we can win by embracing our progressive brothers, sisters, and siblings, as well as finding ways to frame our messaging that also appeals to the very remnant of mushy middle that might still exist in our political spectrum. Folks who might consider themselves to be either independents or socially liberal libertarian-minded folks, which is a label I've often put on myself. I have come to my place in party politics through a somewhat winding path, of political transition that in some ways mirrors other changes in my life. But
yeah, no, continue, please.
As we think about what the face of our party is going to be here in Indiana, and I think you're right that we can do two things well at once. We can embrace a proudly and boldly progressive future while still working to cast a net of common sense, workaday Hoosier blue dog umbrella that plays to the notion that we are the party of working Hoosiers who will do more to lower the price of eggs than the yahoos who are in the General Assembly right now, who seem to be more focused on defunding our public schools and denying queer people the ability to legally navigate through their lives here in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, they seem a lot more concerned about human women's eggs than they do about chicken eggs.
That's a good distinction.
Back to identity politics. The criticism, I think, should be directed at like empty identity politics, like slapping a rainbow sticker on the same old junk and not actually doing the thing. Like taking a knee and wearing the Kenta cloth without actually passing legislation that will move us forward.
We can do well by ensuring that our all of our marginalized communities are treated fairly under the law and receive the same civil liberties as our neighbors, and also in the process work to lower the incredible gap between the haves and have-nots in our communities. The fact, and this is not just a national conversation about reducing the gap and income inequality. There are simple things that we can do at the state level, like taking away sales taxes from everyday items that everyone needs for their existence, is the inelastic goods that we use, toothpaste and toilet paper. There's no point in casting a sales tax on that, but luxury goods, bring it on. There are plenty of other examples where we can offset reducing taxes for everyday items that everyone has to pay for, including folks who are underemployed or on who are disabled and unable to work, that those inelastic goods can be free of sales tax. And the Shelley Yoder has been a great champion for getting rid of the pink tax on women's only products. But I think we need to look at this with a more broad brush. What is it that everybody uses? What can we not live without? And we've actually taken great steps by making basic groceries sales tax free, right? That is extraordinary compared to many other states. But there are lots of other things that folks need for their daily existences. That's just one example of something that can help close the gap. Another thing, obviously, is going away from the income tax, or the flat income tax structure that we have here in the state of Indiana, and join the majority of other states in our nation with a somewhat more progressive tiered bracketed tax system that mirrors our federal income taxes structure, right? So that everybody pays the same income tax on their $30,000 if they make $30,000, but the person who is fortunate enough to make $300,000 on that $300,000, they're going to pay a little bit more out of that dollar. And it's not rocket science to recognize that a progressive tax structure can work to, at the regional level, help close the gap in terms of income inequality.
Yeah, and like you said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like there was a time in this country where economic growth was high, and also wage growth was good, and we were doing a little bit better every year than we were the year before. This is when America was great, right? Apparently that's the era that the MAGA folks kind of want to go back to. And don't get me wrong, I know that those gains weren't evenly distributed in that period.
But I'd be curious. But yeah, let's explore the Eisenhower administration's IRS tax structure, where there is a 90% bracket at the very, very top for those extraordinarily high earners.
Yeah, exactly. All the people who were, sitting right behind Trump at his inauguration the other day, they're the ones who need to pay the high taxes, not the rest of us.
Well, I hope that folks recognize, and this is, I think maybe we're coming a little bit full circle here when we talk about, whose faces are at the table and who's showing representation, because our new governor, Mike Braun, was not there in the rotunda. But the three richest men in the nation were in the room, and the three richest men, if I forget, I think the three richest men possess more wealth than the bottom 40% of our nation, or something like that. It's an extraordinary.
I think it's 50%. Yeah, it's a lot.
So and to have that shamelessly, that shameless representation at what for a leader who professed to be a populist, a leader who was for the people.
Yeah, the little guy, right?
These people have been bamboozled because the leader they elected, we can see who is in the room, and that those people are the people that he is going to be beholden to, and that is authoritarianism in a nutshell.
Yeah, there's some identity politics for you, right? The identity of billionaire, of the makers, the job creators, right? I mean, this is also identity politics.
And so is the fact that neither of our parties have done a great job of communicating to the hardworking, everyday, workaday Hoosiers who struggle to put food on the table for a family of four, working multiple minimum wage jobs to even keep the lights on. in this day and age. And don't get me started on the minimum wage. That's another way of helping to close that gap. We know that there is one party in this state that is focused on closing that gap, and there is one party that is not focused on that closing that gap. But yeah, it's interesting how, that perspective and that image of that scene in the rotunda, I can't help but think that perhaps that's what the new administration wanted all along, in terms of optics, rather than having a crowd of assumedly enormous size. I don't think Sean Spicer was going to go out and fight that battle again.
Oh, poor Spicy. Yeah, no, I think you laid it out. You said neither party does a good job of articulating the plan that just like benefits working people, talks about populist economics.
That's identity politics too. If we're going to use that term, let's be fair, because being lower income, working poor is an identity in our nation right now, and one that neither party has sold its message to successfully. Well, one party has sold the message and it was bought, but they're not going to be working for those folks. We saw that in the optics of what happened in the rotunda. We've seen that in the priorities of the executive actions taken by this federal administration. Last time I checked, denying LGBTQ people their civil rights isn't going to bring down the price of gasoline.
Right.
And it's not going to bring down the price of food, and it's certainly not going to change your tax structure.
Maybe I'm naive, but I believe that if we actually take care of people's basic needs, food, housing, clean water and air, transportation, if we meet people's needs, then they're not gonna fight as much over these identity issues. It's something to keep us fighting about while those billionaires run off with all the money.
But we need to be able to visibly demonstrate that we can do that. And in so many of our rural communities, we have failed to show up and represent in visible ways that impact our communities, whether it is in elected office or in other ways, right? We can all do better at bettering our communities at the local level. I've got, I try to do what I can, but we all have limited capacity in that regard. I give what I can to our community foundation and several nonprofits in our local community here. But yeah, there's only so much that each of us can do. We need to work together, and we need to message well.
Yeah. So, boy, where has time gone? We've only got a little bit left. What else do you want to, I guess, get off your chest while we're still here?
Well, there is hope. In at least I think in my little community, I feel blessed that I do have a place locally to demonstrate leadership and representation, and I proudly serve on our city's plan commission. I'm president of the city's zoning board, and that I was trusted with that role by my fellow board members. So I'm thankful and feel blessed to be able to represent in a way that I know is doing good for our community. And but boy, this is a time when so many folks are fearful. And we need to all step up and be allies for one another and give our neighbors hope. If you have a neighbor who is being impacted by either law or bills that are making their way through the General Assembly, or by executive actions that are coming down from Washington, D.C., please let them know that you have their backs and that you will show them grace, and bring them some aid, as when they need it. These are trying times, and we need to watch out for one another, and have each other's backs. That's where I guess I'll end things. We really need to stick together here, because this is not a time for throwing anybody under the bus.
Agreed, and I couldn't say it better myself. I will let things end there, because that was beautifully said. Veronica Pejril, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Once again, that was Veronica Pejril, the first openly transgender elected official in the Hoosier State, former Greencastle City Council person and candidate for state senate, and recently elected president of Indiana Stonewall Democrats. As Veronica noted, the concept of identity politics is not a new phenomenon. The civil rights movement was identity politics. The suffrage movement was identity politics. War in the Middle East is largely identity politics. Splitting into factions divided by identity is probably the oldest and, unfortunately, still most effective forms of politics. Straight up, us and them, in-group, out-group, good versus evil politics works. It is coarse. It is gross. It is the oldest trick in the book. Follow your moral compass, take the high road, and appeal to your better angels all you want. But it works. I don't think we need to abandon identity politics. I think we're focused on the wrong identities. The oligarchs surrounding Trump at his inauguration, and the little oligarchs like Mike Braun, responsible for the state of affairs in Indiana, would love for the population to continue to fight over identities like black and white, straight and gay, cis and trans. You know what? Billionaire is an identity. Oligarch is an identity. Just as broke is an identity. Struggling is an identity. Working oneself ragged and never catching up, let alone getting ahead, is an identity. These are the identity politics we should be playing. So listen, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about things like race, sex, and gender. I am saying that's not sufficient. If we want to get past the shitty fascist bouncers and into the bumpin' club that is true global democracy, we're going to need a second form of identity politics. What do you think? Let me know in the comments or holler at me on social media. On Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRodge78. You can also email me at scott@whosleft.us. Thanks again to my guest, Veronica Pejril, and thank you for listening. If you can, head over to whosleft.us and help support this project with a paid subscription. Again, hit me on the socials with your feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns. Please forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.